reminding everyone that at the moment we will be discussing in part 2, as you know, the future of this. But at the moment we're broadcasting the meeting, and we have a number of people that we know from outside who are attending and will be attending the meeting remotely. Okay, so assuming that that's going ahead, apologies for absence. Sophie unfortunately can't be with us. She's had an accident. She's okay, but she's needs some time out. She needs some rest. But we wish her the best and hope that she recovers quickly. And we have I don't think we. And yes, sorry, of course, Ian's on leave, and Lorraine is standing in on that one. Can I remind people that if there are any declarations of interest that are not either registered or of a peculiar interest for this meeting, please let us know. I don't see any. Minutes of the last meeting. Are people, first of all, happy to approve these minutes as an accurate record? Okay, I'll take silence as consent. Thank you very much. And then there is one matter arising, which I'm rapidly scrolling down to, which is it's the response to the Nottingham Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust review, which is still in progress. Abby, do you just want to say where we are on that one?
Yes, Chair. So just a point of clarification, the recommendation from the Nottingham review was that we should wait and see what the national guidelines around CPA were going to be. So this recommendation is not exactly from the Nottingham review. It's about the guidelines. So last week we received the draft from Mary Doherty, who's the National Clinical Director, which is it's titled Personalised Care Framework, the Modern Approach to Care Programming. So I've sent it to Lorraine and her team, and I'm meeting with Mary on Monday to give us some feedback, because we do have some concerns about what is being proposed and how that can be implemented. So I will keep the board updated with that.
And what Mary's giving you at the moment is a draft. It is draft, so it is for discussion. Great, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So I think that has to stay as an open item, but it is in hand. Okay, good. Thank you very much. We now move on to really our service user and care involvement focus, a really important project, which actually I heard about a year ago, I think, and I think it's a really very important piece of work that we're doing. Neil, can I ask you to do the introductions, please? Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm delighted to welcome my guests, Karen and Jennifer. I'm talking about a piece of work that I think affects not only service users, carers, but also staff. When we talked about this, I had no idea just how deep the co-production would go and the use of lived experience. I think it's a fascinating story, so I'm not going to hang around. I'm going to hand straight over to you, Karen.
Brilliant. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Karen LaVar.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Davis.
And we're here to talk about as we said, the Involved project. So I'll get straight into it. It's been a real privilege. So would you move? That's lovely. So thinking about our journey. So you might remember I came along to this board about 18 months. Abuse, and there was everyone was really interested, some fantastic questions, and it really did trigger some thinking. But one of the main things that happened was that Neil picked this up and said, this is really interesting, I'd love to find out people's lived experience about domestic abuse and what would make a difference to them longer term. How could we find out? How could we explore that? And really, so thank you, Neil. It was really motivating. And then linked me into the wonderful Involved team. And I want a big call out to Japleen, to Sian, to Reshma, and now to Kelly, who have been absolute stars. And we wouldn't have been able to do this without them, would we? They were amazing. So we first of all reached out to the Involved Network and did a couple of presentations. First one online, second one face to face. There was a lot of interest around, we really want to find out more, we really want to be there. And so we took that on with Japline's support to interview people to say, would you like to be part of this project? And this was initially service users. So we started off interviewing service users, and we got a number of service users that were very interested. And we didn't ask for them to have experience of domestic abuse, we just wanted their views on how we were working with that. They all had experience of domestic abuse. That's why they came forward, and some very much, they were a really traumatizing history that were able to share throughout their time with us. But that was okay for them. They felt safe, and we made sure that was safe. So we started off the project, and alongside that, we had wonderful staff that came forward and said, well, you were there right at the beginning, actually, weren't you? There at the first meeting, but there were additional staff that come along after. Jenny's been part of this right from the beginning. So we ended up with consistently over the whole year, because it's a whole year coming up to now, we had 4 to 5 service users and 4 staff that came to every meeting once a month, and they came up with the themes. So and the themes, these were themes that they raised. We had lots of discussions, and these were the themes that we come up with. And it was really interesting, because at the beginning, my idea of what this may look like really wasn't how I experienced it, and it's been a real I don't know, for me, a real learning curve in regards to the way I practice, and hopefully that's influenced safeguarding team, because it's starting to, and I can explain that, how that might be. Did we put, yeah. So the things that have changed so far, and this isn't the end of the project yet. We've got another meeting to go where we're going to think about what's going to happen next. So this isn't the end of it at all. But already this embedded lived experiences in our training resources, all the training, the level 3 and any webinars have all got lived experience within them, such as stories, videos, etc. It's collaborative training. I've already done some training with one of our service users, and I must say, Laura, if you're listening in, what star, she came out and did a 200 face-to-face 200 people Bromley event with talking about her lived experience, which was so powerful. And also staff members done some webinars with me as well, and that continues. We're evolving and developing that. The co-development of the strategy, I don't know how many of you had a chance to look at the strategy. It was in the bundle, but if you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do, because it looks extremely different to the one before. And a call out again, thank you for the support from the champions, domestic abuse champions from the Involved Network, to make that as good as it is. Well, I think it is. And then development, as I say, of our team, the way I think, I mean, and that's where this door comes from, really, because I spoke to Neil and I thought, and I hadn't discussed about the door with you, but it's sort of like, well, how's this almost like coming to the end of the project? For me, I'm at the beginning of the project. So I don't know if that makes sense to people, but for me, I've just thought, hang on, I've opened the door now. I'm thinking in a different way, and this is where we've already learnt loads, and hopefully you'll be able to see all of that when it's all pulled together in a meaningful way. But actually, we're thinking so differently now, aren't we, Jenny? And a platform for future development. So again, the open door. Jenny's going to talk about some of the things as we go through, but some of the comments here. I don't know if you wanted to. Can you all read those? Yeah, rather than go through them, some of the things we had. And this one, is it me? Do you remember that?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a real pleasure just being part of this project. And I think Karen left out the bit how we met. I actually attended a training and she was talking about various things and experiences and giving scenarios. And I was immediately hooked, and I thought, oh, something's, I need to be involved in whatever's going on. So we had a conversation. It was just me and Karen in the room at one point. We just interacted. I answered questions, I asked questions, and all sorts of things. So that's how I got involved with this, because I realized that there was a real benefit in being able to be a voice for some of the staff that aren't able to have that voice at that moment in time, and just really to be able to make a difference and just bring my own experiences into the project. So that's how that started, and it was amazing. And it's been really great just meeting people in that group. And of course, the images are really powerful. For some people, words are never enough, really. So you draw a picture or you paint a picture, and that's enough to tell somebody what's really going on. And we've got some real artists in the group as well, haven't we, that have been able to draw these pictures. And this is one of them. Unfortunately, we don't really have a description, but this is done by one of the members in the group. And just conversations I've had with this person, she's had a lot happening, a lot of experiences, and possibly a lot of trauma. So this for her is really meaningful in terms of her experiences and that journey that she's still on. But I think this group has really given her the platform to be able to talk through some of the things, and just meeting people from different walks of lives and professionals, and just really that changing the idea that domestic abuse has a particular group of people it affects. So it could be anybody. It could be the person sat next to you. It could be your next door neighbor. It could be your colleague. It could be the teachers at the child's school. So just being really mindful about some of the impacts that this could be having and opening up the door to have the conversation. And I think that's what's been really, really powerful. Sitting in a room with people who are sharing their experiences quite openly and being really vulnerable and feeling safe enough to be able to have those conversations with people, not feeling judged or not feeling in any way. So that's been really, really powerful. So this is one of my favorites. So when we first started the group, and Karen loves this one, so I often talked about my experiences feeling like loads of baggage that you're carrying. And the last group we had, I said, my car is now full of other people's baggage, because I had 23 kilograms of my own baggage and now I've got 46 kilograms because I've taken on somebody else's baggage. But that's not in a negative way. That's more simply to be that I feel confident enough to have conversations with people I work with, people I sit in the office with who are experiencing domestic abuse, but not feeling safe enough or not feeling ready to be able to have that conversation with somebody because of other factors, cultural factors, religious factors, all the things that most of us know in this room. So I've now taken on somebody else's baggage that I carry around every day, because every time we have a conversation, she tells me something that makes me concerned. And then I have to go into, you need to try and such and such and this. Should we talk about this? How can we support you? So, and I'm now more open to these conversations. And I said to Karen, my cultural backgrounds, these aren't conversations that people have every day. So it's almost, you don't talk about these things, they're left behind the cupboards or you keep it in your homes. So this is really giving me the confidence. And I think just to be able to have these conversations in the church, in the communities, in schools, wherever it is that you find me, I'll be going, oh, what's going on with this young person? And just being able to open up that conversation. So yes, so I'm carrying my own baggage and I'm getting rid of some of it. I'm decluttering, but then I'm taking on other people's baggage, and I'm quite happy to do that because this is what's helped. This project has really helped me to be able to do that.
This work is important to me because domestic abuse is all around us. It is going on in people's homes, the community, the workplace, and it affects all races, ages, cultures, class, and religions and backgrounds. It is in effect a pandemic. As a domestic abuse warrior, it is something I am very passionate about. Unspoken understanding that we have a mutual bond and respect for each other, and everyone's backstory is unique.
Just the awareness that domestic abuse can affect anyone, or anyone can be impacted by domestic abuse, and it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your culture is, what religion, or what job you do.
In terms of why the work is important to me, it's because it creates a rare and powerful space where real voices and lived experience are not just heard but centred. Domestic abuse is such a profound and painful subject that without having lived through it, it's really impossible to fully understand the depth of its impact. Being part of the group has given me and others an opportunity to listen and to recognise the strength, vulnerability and courage that comes from sharing such personal truths.
The most meaningful moment for me in this group is when we all said how we feel everyone has grown and healed a little, and how we all agree that this can happen to literally anyone. The lived experience of domestic abuse is for each individual's unique perspective is something that you can only fully understand if you have been through it yourself. People sharing their experiences is paramount to Oxleas having a clearer understanding of domestic abuse and its full impact on people's lives.
Being part of this group has been absolutely fantastic for me, in the sense that it's allowed me or given me the confidence to be able to have meaningful conversations with people when it matters, and have those conversations in a way that is respectful and caring.
In terms of what the board needs to understand about lived experience in the shared space, is that the group are not abstract or distant. They are real lives shaped by trauma, resilience and survival. Each of our stories carry lessons about what support should look like and where systems fail, and what real empathy requires. Listening to our voices isn't just an act of compassion, it's a duty and a responsibility. The insight shared in the group should guide every decision, policy and action moving forward.
In the group that weren't, sorry, just say there are other people within the group that their voices have been captured in other ways, and you will be seeing those resources coming out as we develop them moving forward. And we have a huge mounting of pictures and poems, etc., that are really informing the work we do. Again, today we haven't been able to bring it because of the limited time, but you will be seeing that. You will have access to that. Thank you very much for listening to that.
Thank you, Jenny and Karen. That's really moving and powerful, and just as well, I know that I was speaking to the Greenwich Health and Wellbeing Board, and they're very keen. They've been very keen to build links because that's one of the main planks they want to take forward, and want to have mutual learning between what you have done and what they're doing. So I think that's a really positive thing as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. Any questions or comments that people will make? Rachel and then Sally.
That was brilliant. Thank you. Yet again, it brings really home for me how we start a process to try and improve our policies and our approach by speaking to people and hearing about their experiences. What actually happens is something really transformational for the individuals who are involved, and that becomes part of their healing process and starts to give them some agency over some of the awful things that have happened to them. So I'm really keen that we think about the benefits of that in so many different aspects of the work that we do. I suppose I was just also reflecting on how much you all of you who are involved in this work are carrying yourselves. I've been thinking about it in relation to the sexual safety work as well. So people are opening up to you about some of the most profoundly difficult things that they will have ever experienced in their lives. And I just want to check, do you feel as though you have enough support in terms of the amount of emotional stuff that you're all carrying?
I think probably for me, working in the safeguarding team, this is something we discuss quite often because we are dealing with vicarious trauma all the time within the office. But I do think in regards to domestic abuse, we have a gap because, and we've talked about that, Jenny, haven't we? Because there isn't that space that people can come to reflect and think together. We've been privileged to be part of that, but there isn't that space going forward. So I think we're thinking how we're going to develop that and how that might look, because I don't think we can just end this. There's lots of staff have come forward during this project and said, can we be part of that? And we've had to say, sorry, it's closed now, because it had to feel safe. We couldn't open it up all the way through. It had to be a closed, safe network. So we could have had 20 more people as part of this, but we couldn't do that. So we need to meet that need. So yeah, there is a gap. It's definitely be thinking about as part of the plan, as part of the strategic plan.
I think equally one of the great things that Karen hasn't mentioned is that the support that's been made available to us who are part of that group. So the meeting will often start off with end with a little bit of a reflection. Is everybody okay? Is there anything that people have talked about that's making them feel a particular way? Please email me. I think I remember the first meeting we had, Neil. I ended up in tears on the screen. And then I had Karen and Neil trying to console me because it was just so powerful and just really amazing just to be able to talk about certain things and have that platform and see how we can make a difference. So that support is there, although there isn't kind of a set way that we do it. I think you're very mindful that you don't want people going away or if somebody hasn't turned up for a meeting, there's always that bit of a check-in. So that's kind of what we've got in the interim. But I think most of us in that group, members of staff, we already have our outside support in supervision and various other things that we can also tap into, and well-being champions and things like that. So that's available. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just reflecting how it's such a collective approach, and I think it builds on our involved work, and basically we're all people trying to live a life and deal with things, and it moves away from that kind of health, we know best type attitude, and I think that fits in with things like the 10-year plan, where particularly in neighbourhoods we're trying to work together as communities to make things better and have that shift. So I think this is a really good example of that, but it takes bravery as well, because you're kind of moving outside those guidelines a little bit, and so well done for trying it and trying something new.
Asfa?
So firstly, I think it was incredibly brave for those people that actually put themselves on video that had been through this process, because it is such a traumatic process. Having read the stuff in the reading room, I was really glad to see that we'd had the kind of the family side of it and the impact on children. And I think that is something that we need to be very aware of when we're dealing with our CYP directorate. I'm saying this because I know individuals that have unfortunately suffered from domestic abuse and the impact that that's had on their children, but also the fact that I knew somebody quite well that was in a same-sex relationship, and having that conversation of just a couple of things that they said, marking and then having a conversation with them, but I felt comfortable doing that because I knew them really well. And I think that's the bit about safety. And then I just wanted to loop back to the first point. So I'm wondering whether or not, and I'm saying this as the exec lead of the Women's Network, but cognizant that obviously it can impact more than women on domestic abuse, because it can happen to anybody, is whether or not we do want to set up a subgroup of one of those listening events. We just need to decide how we structure it between maybe the women and the men's network, if it's appropriate, to then just have a regular session where at least members of staff can discuss that element, because we will, just by the numbers and the incidents that you normally have this, have members of staff that are in that place. And perhaps we could also then do something around some of the reflective practice of the people that are dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, because I think you can get that vicarious impact. I'm happy to kind of take that up under the Women's Network to begin with, and then perhaps think through how we could expand it.
That'd be really helpful. I have tried to do this in the past, but unfortunately, because of the network changing, I haven't been able to be there. And just to say, in regards to the men's network, there's lots of momentum there, and we have a Mankind representative coming along to the next face-to-face, because there's lots of thoughts around domestic abuse and men as victims. So have been thinking about that. Perhaps that'd be fantastic to get the support to be able to get that momentum going. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jane.
Thank you. That was really good. I just wanted to congratulate you on the strategy and the report, because the first time I read it, it was like nothing I'd ever read before. It was,
Thank you, Jo.
Came through, the pictures, you could really see how intensely people have put themselves into it, and the real meaningful comments. And I think we have a duty to listen, hear and take that forward. So you do have our commitment for that. But I also wanted to commend you on all of the groups that you're supporting. And this might sound controversial, but I know you're really cognizant of supporting the perpetrators and helping them as well. And I just wanted to make sure that came through. And finally, I just want to let everyone know that Karen's been nominated for a National Safeguarding Board Recognition Award on the 5th of November. And I wanted to say well done, and very well deserved.
Thank you, Jane.
I think that's a really good note to finish this session. And I think, you've heard from here that you've done an immense piece of powerful work. There's still a little bit going forward that you're doing, but this is not something, having started this work, this is not something we can put down and forget. We've got, I think that the board clearly have said their responsibility to take this forward. So thank you very much indeed. And we will, we look forward through maybe the Women's Network, maybe other places. Let's see the right home for it. But we will make sure that that this is something that we take forward. So thank you very much. And you are, of course, welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. On the other hand, you're also welcome to think you have other things that you might want to do with your lives. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So I think that's a really grounding way for us to continue our rest of our meeting. And so we will now move on to the Board Assurance Framework update. Iffy, if you could take us into that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we would usually go through the Board Assurance Framework twice a year, but I was hoping that perhaps we wouldn't do that today, given that we want to look at this in some detail. I think in January, at the February meeting here, I know that there are a number of issues captured in the front sheet in terms of are we reflecting our strategic risks? So it will be something useful for each of our board committees to think about, especially with the help of the executive leads. Something about the distinction between issues and risks. So what are we capturing in there? And finally, a question about our risk appetite, and therefore where we want each of these risks to land and whether we tolerate them or not. But just in terms of overview, there's no real change in the number of risks. We still have 10 risks. 4 of them are significant, 3 are high, and 3 are moderate. And the significant ones, which are the only ones I wish to just mention, about financial sustainability. Wouldn't surprise anyone. We've got a real challenge in terms of our SIP this year and next year. Bexley PFI, we're still working through the issues, trying to have a better understanding and hoping that we'll be able to do something when the opportunity comes in 2028. Cybersecurity, I think the view is we can do everything that we possibly can to mitigate and hope that it doesn't happen. But some people take the view that this is a case of when it happens and not so much if it does. But we need to keep trying to mitigate that risk. And then the final one is on bed management for a variety of reasons, not least making sure that the care people get is timely, so people aren't in hospital for much longer, making sure that when people need to access beds, they access beds, and the quality of the delivery when they're in hospital is also good. And then there are some other impacts, such as making sure people don't go outside of area for care, and that we try and manage the costs. So those are just the significant risks that I wanted to raise. Won't go on to the high or the moderate, but happy to take questions or field questions that my exec colleagues and NED chairs can pick up.
Thank you. Thank you, Iffy. So accepting that we're going to be looking at what the risks are again in detail in the February meeting, perhaps we should concentrate on these risks and questions around these risks and the mitigations. Any questions or comments, please?
A question or suggestion, but mostly a couple of comments from me as chair of the Audit Risk and Assurance Committee. I think I'm getting it right. So first of all, we have a really sophisticated risk management framework, and hats off to all the work done by Sue. I think this is one of the more sophisticated set of risk management or risk oversight documents I've seen in any organization, and I find that hugely reassuring. From a cultural point of view, having been in this organization for about a year, I'm very confident that the risks are being discussed in the right forums and are being addressed and are being identified. So I'm not worried about that. But then to add to that, and my final point on Iffy's comment, yes, at the margin, I think there's a bit of thinking to do on some of the risks, maybe the wording of the risk, whether some of the risks need to be either integrated, merged, or rephrased. And then we need to think about risk appetite. One suggestion maybe for Alison and for others on cybersecurity and IT risks. This is clearly a catastrophic risk we're facing. And I think it would be good practice for us as a board to rehearse or think about what happens in an incident and look at the scenarios and think about the decision-making processes and who does what. I recently attended a webinar on ransomware. The strong recommendation was for boards to look at scenario analysis and understand what the questions are going to be, what the issues are going to be, who's going to decide what, and what is possible or not in an incident. So let's assume that some of our database have been corrupted. What happens? What do we do? And the strong recommendation was that a lot of that thinking should happen before the incident, so that when the incident happens, you can have an easier discussion with the board and the executive team. So I'd suggest we look at some sort of scenario analysis, and the questions are, what do we do? What would we do? What would the remedies be? Who decides what? If there's ransomware, what happens? What are the links with NHS England and the Cybersecurity Centre and so on? I think it's important for the board to be aware of all of that before an incident happens to make it easier in the unlikely event something happens.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful suggestion. Alison?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely fine to do that. I think in the event of a cyber incident, we would immediately contact NHS England. There's a cybersecurity operations control centre who would take control. They would provide advice and guidance on the specific incident at hand. You know, ransomware, you know, do we pay, do we not pay? NHS England's view is we don't pay. But yeah, we could run through that as a scenario. We do that with the EPRR team. So that was done recently as an exercise, or relatively recently as an exercise, but obviously hasn't included the board in that.
Yes, I must admit, I think it would be helpful. I'll hear Martin in a moment. I was involved in one trust where we ran these exercises and then realised that on a catastrophic cut down of the IT system, nobody knew the chairs of the board's telephone numbers because they were all on the IT system. So there is sometimes, so it might be worthwhile running through some of this within the Oxleas, but really good to hear that we're connected through Martin.
I'm going to support Damon and what you've just said. Having been the goal command for 3 London-wide cyber attacks, you can't practice enough before an event to get it. And the biggest challenge you've got is not in what you do today, but what you do in 6 weeks and 12 weeks and half a year's time, because the National Cybersecurity Centre will tell you you can't restart, you can't restart, you can't restart. And yet we've got to treat patients and we've got to pay staff and we've got to feed our staff and our patients. So we've got to really practice about recovery as much about the incident itself.
Thank you, Manita.
Yeah, just to add to that, right? It's the practicalities of things like phone numbers, food, etc. So identifying and mapping exactly where those points are. And we're talking about this in the context of cybersecurity, but actually those kind of simulations could be relevant in a lot of different scenarios, right? So you have a catastrophic weather event and we lose mobile reception. How easy will it be for people to work? So we should probably think about, it's about resilience, not just in cybersecurity, but in the event of anything unpredictable that's catastrophic.
Yes, and I guess my experience as well is it's almost impossible to war game or gameplay exactly what's going to hit you because you don't know what's going to hit you, but it gets you in the way of thinking about what your contingencies are and who the key people are, and so on. So I think, yes, Abby.
So having been involved with the Synovis one for a long time, I think the issue, and Alison and I have spoken about this, is about our business continuity plans, especially around patient safety. And having learned from other organisations, because one of the first things when SLAM had their event was not knowing patients that needed depot medication, or not knowing patients that needed a follow-up or something like that. And part of our issue is that you then may have shadow IT. So you have all these spreadsheets that show, and it's how we sort of get the balance between what may happen and what is our recovery plan, and not sort of overload and have two different systems running because you're expecting. So it's that risk tolerance and where is our risk level.
Thank you very much. Yes, Jim.
Just a quick one around responsibility. So I think the EPR sits audit and risk, but cybersecurity seems to be a business and infrastructure risk. So the two don't seem to be connected. So my thought is, if we were going to do scenario planning, where would it sit and who would govern that? And I think it sits between two stools at the moment, and that might be why I'm a bit blindsided over it. We do cybersecurity, we go through the bits and pieces, but the EPR set in audit and risk, and the two don't touch. So maybe there needs to be some thought around, if we are going to do this, where does that sit and who is in command? Because I think we do need a gold command. I'm sure it's in the EPR.
I was just going to say we need to give that further thought, and maybe depending on what we decide to do, we'll bring this to. I'm assuming this is best done at a strategic board, not a formal board, and so it'll be an opportunity to just refresh and make sure there's clarity. Yeah,
I think that's okay. So I think we have a clear action going forward on this one, that we need to think through what sort of simulation or preparedness, really concentrating on the resilience of the systems after the event and recovery after the event. And thinking through the links between audit and risk and BIC and who the key people are. And a lot of it, I think, probably is being done and is being known, but again, making it visible to us, so that, to the whole board, so that everybody knows their role that they have or they don't have in it. The last thing you need is a whole load of Neds wandering around in an emergency, making a pain of themselves without wishing to downgrade myself and my fellow Neds. We have distinct roles, and it's good for us to know them. Good. Thank you very much. Any other questions about the board assurance framework? No, thank you very much indeed. That's very helpful. A big piece of work to do there going forward, but I think really important. We now move on to item 6, the board capability self-assessment. As the board will be aware, we looked at this in our last development session, and then we had an email correspondence to approve the submission that we made to NHS England on this. And in the record, we see here what we submitted. This is going to be part of our work going forward. This is ongoing, and so. And this time we were able to build on top of our board effectiveness review that we'd done earlier, and the self-assessment we did as part of that. And we agreed that what we were going to do is look at this in more detail in today's meeting, and also think through how we are going to take this forward. And one of the proposals that's coming out of this is each of the domains that forms part of this is going to be assigned to a governance group, and so that we make sure that we have the oversight of it going forward that we need. There's two things that we want to think about. First of all is to confirm our submission, which I hope we are happy to do since we agreed it all by email. But more importantly, perhaps to think about the future self-assessment approach, and if people are happy with this approach going forward, to make sure for future submissions that we'll have to make every year. Sally, do you want to add anything to that? Have I missed something out? Any comments on this? Rachel? I'm going to keep hold of this, otherwise I'll never be able to speak again.
Can I just check whether we're expecting to get feedback from the central team on it?
So we've got confirmation that it's been received. We've had one follow-up request for an overview of the external well-led review that we did in 2022. And they've said that they don't think we'll need to provide any further information. And then we're expecting, I think in December, a confirmation of agreement, hopefully, with our self-evaluation.
Thank you. So can I take this as people are happy with this as the way going forward? And yes, Martin.
Sorry, I raised my hand at the wrong time. I'm not going to say no, I'm not happy. I am happy. I just think it's the product we've produced is great. And I think it benefited from the long discussion we had at the strategic board seminar. And I think in other strategic documents like this, having the opportunity as non-executive directors to feed into and contribute to emerging documentations is really important. But I think it's a really good document because of it.
Thank you. And I actually think this is a document, for me, it is a really good document because it tells us something about what it is. And to me, this is going to be, if the CQC come knocking on my door tomorrow, this is going to be one of my grab documents in order to be absolutely, to be clear about the things that one knows, but one sometimes forgets in the heat of the moment as to where we have those key lines of evidence. So for me, I think it's really been a useful exercise. Suzanne.
So I was just wondering about how we're going to incorporate this into the annual committee reviews, in the sense that do we all want to do the same thing, or is each committee going to decide, or each committee chair going to decide how they want to do it?
I think that I can have a discussion with all the committee chairs of how we take it forward. So if we agree the principle that that's how we will do it, and obviously there may be updates, we're expecting this process to be repeated again at the end of the financial year, but there may be slight changes. But if we can incorporate it into our annual planning and review process, then I think that would be the neatest way. But if I can link in with people and we can work out actually how we do the details, then I'm always happy to be as flexible as possible.
Thank you. I think the important thing there is that how the individual committees do it may vary, but the output has got to be reasonably consistent across them all, as it has here. But I think that's doable. Okay, thank you. We're happy with that. We'll move forward then. Chair's report. Several things. I think things that have happened yesterday or yesterday evening, indeed, things have blown up in the sector. One of which is the resident doctors and Res Streeting writing to the resident doctors with an offer. The strike is scheduled for the end of next week. And Abby might want to say something about our preparedness for that, and perhaps more under Iffy's item than my item. But clearly, this is people have heard on the news today that and the letter has been circulated to many people that Res Streeting has sent to all resident doctors. Arguing that there shouldn't be any more of a pay increase, but giving other items to the junior doctors to try and encourage them. That's clearly between the department and NHS England and the resident doctors, and we're not directly involved in that one, but we're obviously very affected by that. The other thing, again, that we're not directly involved in, but we're affected by is the controversy or the news around Wandsworth, Her Majesty HMP Wandsworth. And again, I think that while we're not directly involved, our partners and our close colleagues are directly involved, and this makes us working, we have to be very cognizant as we work with our partners of these stresses on them, and it's going to change our relationship with them as they are under pressure from other places, and that's how it is. The other piece of big news, which is neither in Iffy nor mine report, and I don't know who should cover it, but I'll cover it, and then if you might want to say more about it, of course, is that since these were written, David Bradley, as chief exec of SLAM, has announced his retirement in the winter, coming up in the winter. He's done tremendous service in the NHS. I think it's 43 years in the NHS. He started as a school leaver in the NHS and has gone on and done a fantastic career in the NHS, and clearly that is going to be a hole that needs to be filled, but also going to change the landscape, because it always does change a landscape when somebody who's been in that position goes. There's not a lot to say about that one except to wish him the best and congratulate him. And I've had several conversations with him, two conversations with him since his announcement. I think I'm not going to go through my report as written, because a lot of things have been happening as is the way at the moment. Recently, I'm just going to pull out one thing. I know Iffy will be talking about it, but I can't not talk about the South London Listens event, which is my first time in South London Listens event. And if you've never been to one of these events, they are quite something. About 1,000 people were crowded into St. George's Cathedral, and somehow Iffy, myself, and I think Sally, you were up there as well, ended up on stage tying ourselves together with pink ribbons. And I still don't quite know how I managed to do that, but we ended up with everyone tied together with bits of pink ribbon, and it was an event. But I think this is something where we are really committed to South London Listens. And what I would say really impressed me about South London Listens is the way in which it has assembled a vast number of different communities, different people from very different community backgrounds to decide on action. And that action actually has made tangible changes. And they've often made tangible changes by working out something that is doable and then doing it. So just one example was that in a couple of boroughs, they've now managed to get the agreement that all short-term housing for people will have internet in it, which actually is is a relatively cheap thing for the councils to do, but incredibly impactful for the individuals who are trying to access health or other social care in it. And I think it's actually really, I was also really impressed with the matureness of the debate, that they want us to do things, but they don't expect us to deliver the moon when we can't deliver the moon, but they expect us to deliver things that make a difference when they can. So I just really commend that organisation and their respectful dialogue that we had with them. And I think it's something that certainly Eve and I have been talking about, that we want to really play our role in. Other things that I've carried on, as you can see, having links with external things. I think that the respect that Oxleas is held in is important, and the way that we work in partnership is important. You see that with Carlton Athletic, the meme, as well as with South London Listens. I've taken part in a number of visits. I think that my high-level reflections on that one is that how strong many of our teams are, and at our best, our teams have really strong local managers that enables teams to be both resilient but also to be reactive to drive change. People don't always welcome change. Of course, none of us welcome change, but I've been reflected on an actual fact. There is actually quite a lot of change that goes on. I mean, only earlier this week I was with Ian in our children's services in Erith, which have undergone an immense amount of change over the last couple of years. And actually the staff were really up for it. There was a lot they didn't like and a lot they did like, and that's the way it is. But actually they were really up for driving the change. And it's made me really think about how, as an organisation, do we help people do change, because often they were doing change and they weren't talking about it as transformation or anything else. They were doing it because it was their job. It reminds me that, in organizations that successfully changed or greatly, 70 to 80% of the change comes from the teams that are involved in the delivery. And somehow we've got to find a way of continuing to allow those teams to deliver the change that they need to do. So we at the top of the organisation, because it is hierarchical, but we at the top of the organisation need to set direction, need to set tone, and somehow we need to make the conditions right for that change to happen. And I think that's something that we need to consider. I think the only other thing I really want to talk about is working in partnership, and it's mentioned in my report about SLP, South London partnership. We're moving to a new system in chairing the committees in common in the South London Partnership, which previously was chaired by a sort of a NED from one of the trusts. We've agreed that the chairs will now chair the South London Partnership Committees in common, building on the really good work that the NEDs have done in chairing this one, but we'll do it on rotation because I think that actually a lot of us see that there is something that we can use this partnership in order to increase the collaboration between the three trusts that make it up. I mean, there already is a lot happening at exec level. There are really good relationships with people's counterparts in general across it. And on SLP programs, there are really good working relationships between the three trusts that on the whole work very, very well. I think there have been times in the past where we perhaps as a collective haven't been as far, as fast or as cooperative as we might have been. And I think that there is now, as the situation gets tight, as we need to improve things, there's a lot that we can be doing together, learning from each other. And I visited earlier this week with Jane, the chair of SLAM. I visited their Lewisham project, building on the work that she'd done in visiting our hub. And so getting to learn more from each other. And that while we need to respect the sovereignty of the three trusts, and it's not around baking that around, it is around actually asking those hard questions where we have different pathways between those three trusts. Is that difference warranted or unwarranted? Might be warranted, it might not be warranted. What are the outcomes that we are going to agree, that we are going to measure things at, so that we can turn around and say, actually, that Lewisham project that SLAM have done, yes, there's a lot that we can learn from it, or actually, no, we're getting the same outcomes in a different way. So I think that that's something where actually, if the three of us work more closely together, building on that close working we've already got, I think we can help. We've got very different skills, we're very different trusts, but actually, you've got SLAM with its associations with the IOPPN providing an academic basis. You've got us and South West London St George's with a very strong service, a very strong user voice. There's a lot that we can actually use to build on each other. And so I don't think that's a change of direction, but it's possibly a change in the thermostat, that we need to turn up the thermostat a little bit in this direction. And I think that's all I have to say, I think, but I'm happy to take comments and on that, Iffy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. Wanted to echo your thanks to David Bradley, who's been a real great colleague, having worked initially in South West London and then SLAM, so really a South London person. And your comment about the SLP, he was a founding member. And so there's no doubt we'll miss him. But I just wanted the board, and certainly on behalf of the exec, to thank him and to have us minute all of his contributions to our local and indeed London Mental Health Services, as he was a joint chair of the Mental Health Board. Something that you've touched on, but I have made a note to mention, is the fact that you and I met the resident doctors along with Abby, who were really quite pleased. There weren't any major issues from the discussion, but I wonder whether Abby would want to say a thing or two about the 10-point plan, which really is becoming so prominent, with huge expectations, not just on NHS organizations, but also on boards, because I think it'd be useful to hear this, and perhaps we'll come back to it at a later time. Thank you.
So I think towards the end of summer, we received a letter from the National Medical Director, Magana Pandit, around a 10-point action plan to improve the working lives of resident doctors. And there were certain milestones that we were asked to meet against the 10-point action plan. So we had to do a self-assessment against the 10 points. The chief executive had to meet with the resident doctors, which is a meeting that Iffy was referring to. And I got another letter yesterday, and it was on a meeting that Jane and I were on yesterday about boards need to consider adding it to the board assurance framework with the progress being monitored, and it needs to go into the 25-26 annual report for each trusts. The plan also asks for a senior executive lead, which is me, and then there's supposed to be a peer representative for the resident doctors who should present the issues they have to the board, and we're thinking that that would happen through the People's Committee to the board. I think that's the best way for that to be done. There has also been some suggestion that it will be included in the NHS Oversight Framework progress against the 10-point plan, and I know it was something that the Secretary of State referred to in the letter that he sent to the resident doctors. On the national call that we had yesterday, there have been some concerns that this is just about resident doctors, and there are reasons why that is the case, but it is hoped that this part of work should be for all staff working within the NHS and not just resident doctors. But I will keep you updated, and I wanted to give you the name of the rep. I think her name is Margarita Custeni. She's a higher trainee working in CAM, so I will meet with her and we'll work out how she will present to the board. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Abby. So questions either for Abby or indeed myself, or comments? Suzanne.
Thanks for your report, which I think was really, really useful in terms of understanding some of what is known to yourself and Iffy. There are a couple of questions I had arising from what you'd said and a comment. So the prisons piece. I was really struck when I visited a number of the prisons in the southwest, is how many young new prison officers are women. And one of the things that I'm a bit concerned about, particularly given I couldn't watch the whole of the BBC documentary on Wandsworth, but the bit I could bear to watch was very worrying. And I am concerned that we have a workforce in prisons which is extremely vulnerable to manipulation and boundary challenges, and I'd be interested to know what we're doing about that. And I wonder whether on a future occasion this might be something which we'd want to hear from our forensics and prison directorates. On the SLP, I think it's really good that the three chairs are now going to be kind of leading the committee in common. And I think it's an opportunity for us as a board to get to know a bit more about SLP, which hasn't had a very high profile at board in the past. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is about the support for change and transformation, because I think one of the things that we are doing that I want people to be aware of are the squad goals, which people will remember we had a discussion about at one of the strategy away days. We have had a couple of reports on how the organisational development leadership is working with each of the directorates and therefore each of the teams on ensuring that our strategic goals are incorporated into their work and that they get the appropriate support to be able to do that kind of transformation work on top of the day-to-day work, which is not to say that I don't agree with you that a lot of the day-to-day change work just happens without people even thinking about it as change work. It's just making things better for patients.
Thank you. I think the last two are comments which I absolutely agree with. The first one around the I can only give my observations from visiting a number of prisons, and I think that there are, that when I visited prisons, particularly the ones in London, there's been a lot of conversation going on around those very boundaries that you talk about, and when things go wrong, often with prison officers or something like that, it's because there's some high-profile cases that have been in the news. They are because these boundaries have been breached. And I was actually quite impressed in a recent visit to ISIS, which is our young persons, the prison we serve in, of young persons down in Woolwich, at how we are actually also putting in work where we are supporting the prison officers in some of this thinking as well, around both trauma-informed care, but also around the psychological support and forming boundaries and doing like that. And I thought that was a really good example of team working that we have between the prison and our services to help both sides of them. And my reflection is that we have a really strong relationship in ISIS with the governor. It's a prison that has its problems, but is performing well. It's a challenge prison because of the nature of the work they're doing, and that is something that really, the strong relationship between the governor or the governor involved in health and our team can be really, really productive. I think it's probably fair to say it's not always that productive. Is there any? Yes, Jim. You're as one of the prison visitors as well.
Just to take on what Suzanne said about the prison and safeguarding, when we went down to Channings Wood and Exeter, one of the things that came back from the staff discussion is that because the prison population is changing and significantly changing, there may be some holes in our training. So there was, I think, Channings Wood, they're getting a large change in their prison population as more sex offenders are coming in. And there is this concern that they probably need additional training around boundaries and there was that concern coming from them. So it may be that we need to keep on top of the changing complexion of our prisons and then look at the training that might be required.
Thank you. Yes, and we've got a number of prisons where populations are changing. Thank you. Good. If there are no more comments, and I can't see any on the screen, but if anyone close to the screen sees them, do feel free to yell because it's a little way away from me. Iffy, can I ask you for the Chief Executive's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So as usual, I'm going to assume that board members have had the chance to read my report, but I intend to highlight just a few items. So you see that I've started by drawing attention to quite a number of publications, many of which the exec are responding to as required. The first and really significant one, of course, is the medium-term planning framework. We do have a structure in place for addressing that, and we'll be talking about this also in part 2 of our meeting. You see that I've made an attempt to give people the context, because sometimes when you see these goals that are set by NHS England, you kind of wonder how far away from it. It hasn't always been possible to do so in the community services or the mental health asks, but if you look in the operational report, we've made an effort to speak to our own data because this is largely about the national expectation. I think you'll also see that there are a number of other reports that I've mentioned. The Green NHS Plan, we talked about this at our last strategic board meeting. The resources that are available to reduce restrictive practice. Again, this is something we've always talked about in this organization. Really delighted that our progress has been incredible. And I will say that, because we worked on this for several years. Colleagues may wonder why this has been raised in terms of letting people know what the resources are. But that's partly, I believe, because this was in the NHS outcome framework and had to be withdrawn because the challenge was if you start highlighting the proportion of restrictive practice organizations have, reporting may fail. And if people don't report, we then don't improve it. And so I think this is an effort to make sure that people are aware of the resources and that each organization focuses on this in much the same way as we've had to do. You see the neighborhood development, again, more detail in the operational report that Lorraine is presenting on behalf of Ian. But just a significant thing I wanted to raise here is the fact that Sarah has been asked to represent us as we begin to shape what it means to be an integrator. This is really to free someone up who can attend the meetings and then be supported by the exec in shaping things across both Bexley and, of course, Greenwich. The CDC here was successfully opened last month, operating 2 days a week at the moment. In fact, it was at the opening that I heard the local MP say to me that he's managed to lobby for it to be open 5 days a week. So we look forward to that, and hopefully at some point it will open 7 days a week, which was the original intention. And I was particularly delighted that Robert Shaw, who lost his life to cancer some years ago and who was a real campaigner and did a great deal across Southeast London, but especially in this area, to see the CQC come to fruition, was commemorated, and his wife and children were there. And I was really very delighted because Robert did do a lot on our behalf. The NHS staff survey is on. It will end at the end of this month. We are urging and encouraging staff to complete the survey. We've been saying that it's important for them to have their say. I did a recording, I think a month ago, sent out an email a few days ago, and I think I'll probably have to continue to remind people every week because we want to achieve a return that's more than 60%, which is where we got to last year, as you'll recall. And it's genuinely about having people tell us what it's like to work in Oxleas, so we can be sure of the experiences and what to focus on. Flu vaccination, I think it's fair to say that many of us, if not everyone here, has received it. If not, I'm sure Jane will be prepared to offer it over lunch. But it's also, every effort is being made to increase the proportion of our staff who take the vaccination this year. Be good to see as many of us as possible at the Staff Recognition Awards, 8th of December. I think it's always an opportunity to just say thank you to some special staff who've gone over and above, but also an opportunity to just thank teams, many of who show up at these events. Really couldn't believe it when I read, or Sally told me, that we're on our 6th shadow exec. Unbelievable, and in fact, that's one group that I think we should always thank, because when you reflect on it, these are people who, in addition to their day jobs, give time to read our papers, to give us their views, and to help us shape the organization. You'll see that I have put in, I'll have to call it a shadow oversight framework in there, which, if everything goes to plan, means that when we get the next publication, which I suspect will be in January, I'm not sure, we should be in North 1. If we're not, I think I'll be the saddest man ever, because 3 goes, but I was also thinking that it might help us when we find the time, and certainly before the new financial year, to talk about all the new ones that will be coming in 2026, as well as the acute ones that are relevant to us, and the ICB targets. So I think it would be good to just spend time as a board just checking that we're prepared. And I'll be mentioning some of these in part 2 in terms of what we're doing to address areas where we have gaps. And again, if you look at the operational report from Ian, it's all detailed. There are lots and lots of figures. And happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Ife. It's not in your report, but I'm sure you'll all have seen the news about the train incident near Peterborough. And once again, this is unfortunately, after Southport and Calcane, another very high-profile, well-publicised incident of someone who, from what I've read in the press, is expected to suffering from mental ill health and known to services. And I'm just wondering, I mean, that makes me worry, about people's perception and prejudices about mental ill health, given how widely publicized this is, and also the pressure on the staff who have to make really tough judgment calls about some of their patients. And I'm wondering if we are doing anything to sort of try and understand that or predict some of the implications of that we might want to get ahead of.
Thank you for that. So I will say that since the incident, many of us in leadership roles across the NHS have been worrying. I've talked about this on 2 or 3 occasions. I did on Monday when the exec met. You're kind of wondering, is this someone with severe and enduring mental illness? It is a worry for clinicians right across any organization, because constantly you hear of any news and you're thinking, this is someone who is known to us, etc. What are the likely implications? I think that once the news is amplified, as Valdo was, there will be criticisms. There's no doubt about that, and it'll be a case of, well, more lessons to be learned, etc. And Abby's point about the recommendation for how CPA is replaced that she touched on, and they need to go back and ask how we're going to address the ask, I think would be crucial. She didn't say much about it, but this is the expectation that everybody who perhaps has a psychosis or who has complex needs has a named care worker. And will have implications, not just in terms of resources, but for individuals. And I think that that's probably where this is going to land. I suspect that when we hear more about this, there's going to be that expectation. So we just need to think about what that would mean, especially at a time when we're redesigning our services. Can you not hear me? Yeah, especially at a time when we're redesigning our services. So that's a real concern. Is there anything we can do to preempt it? I think we've already started. I think it's fair to say that in the last year, at least, there has been a lot of discussion about our provision. How do we make sure that we meet the needs of people? How do we work with families and others to keep them engaged? And to support them successfully. But it's going to be, I have no doubt, this will have a real impact.
Abby.
Thanks. I think my concern is about the public perception and whether that would then lead to more restrictions within the Mental Health Act. I know there's a current mental health review around diagnosis, and Simon Wesley also reviewed the Mental Health Act at the time, and the latest data shows that there's been an increase in detention rather than a decrease in detention. And I don't need to talk about the health inequalities associated with that, which may be amplified. And as if you were saying, because of how this then gets played out in the public, it also affects clinical practice, and clinicians become much more defensive, which then leads to an increase in our length of stay, GPs not being willing to accept people back into primary care. So the ramifications can be quite vast, and they can affect our transformation. So we shouldn't be in any doubt about that. We don't have all the details around this particular incident yet, but if it is something similar to what happened in Nottingham, I can assure you it will affect clinicians, it will affect the transformation that we want to do as well.
Thank you. Susan.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to pick up the piece around anti-Semitism and racism. I know that as an organisation, we have a really strong commitment to anti-racism. I think one of the problems, I'm not saying that this is for us as an organisation, but more generally, is that anti-Semitism is not viewed as a serious form of racism in the same way that anti-Black racism or anti-Asian racism is. And my own experience of training in the NHS has been that trainers have sometimes expressed anti-Semitic views, which I've challenged. So I'm slightly concerned that the way in which we have formulated this in the report is it's very clearly about anti-racism, but I don't think that people recognise anti-Semitism as the kind of racism that it is. So it was just to anticipate the discussion that there may be at the People Committee, that I think it's really important that we separate out and get really clear the understanding of what anti-Semitism is and how it impacts people, perhaps in the same way that we understand racism against other groups within our society, and that we don't just bracket anti-Semitism under the anti-racism work that we do, that we're clear that this is a problem in the NHS.
Just to respond to that, I agree completely, because the letter from Sir Jim McKay and Joe Lenigan followed the Secretary of State's announcement that the NHS will adopt the anti-Semitism agreement, just that he then expanded it a bit more and talked more broadly about anti-racism. But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But I think there's room there for conversation, because, yes, when I read that definition, it actually needs a bit of gloss put on it to understand, to actually understand what it means in practice to individuals, what that might or might not mean, I think. So I think that's welcome. Rachel.
I was wondering if I could resist coming in, but I can't, I'm afraid. I think you're absolutely right, Suzanne. We need to be crystal clear that when we've been talking about anti-racism all of the time, we have also been absolutely clearly including anti-Semitism in that. And I think we need more of a focus on that across the organisation in order for people to understand the seriousness with which we take it, and to make sure that people aren't thinking that when we're talking about anti-racism, we're excluding anti-Semitism. And I think there's a bit of work for us to do in that sense. What I really want us to do, though, is to see it within that broad umbrella, and all of the work that's associated with anti-racism to be seen in that context as well. But I think there's more that we need to do.
Yes, certainly, of course.
We mentioned, that there is the work that Manchester and UCLH have done, and we presumably know what UCLH has done around uniforms. So I'm just wondering why we're holding off for some kind of further guidance. That this lies within our power to make some kind of decision about uniform issues.
They are due to be sharing what they've done. They haven't yet shared it. So we have a session at the next CPO meeting where they're going to be talking us through it, and we will, of course, take that on board.
And I think a related issue, but not the same, but a related issue that we need to think about is that when Ian and I visited a service earlier this week, one of the problems that the staff were raising was the difficulty in actually having conversations over tricky issues like around Gaza, that individual members of staff were feeling intimidated by members of staff holding different political views, and actually how do we allow people to have respectful conversations in this area, or not have those conversations because they're actually not to do with work. And I think there's a bit more thinking through around that as well. So it's not the same, but a related sort of issue that we need to do there. So, Nina.
Just to say that I think I think it is important to call out things like anti-Semitism rather than subsume it into the broader definition, as Suzanne has said. And I'm very happy for us to take that forward in People Committee.
Okay, thank you. We have some ways forward there. Any other comments for Iffy? Jim?
Just a quick check, really. I mean, scanning through the NOF report, I think we discussed this before about our costs and our relative costs, and I'm sure there's some work going on. Just assurance that CLICS work and the model hospital work is going on such that we'll be looking at that 109% going forward.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Azra, thank you for saving me.
Yes, so we are actually directly looking at that. The problem is that this was set from about a couple of years ago when they took this assessment. So we are currently going through a work of re-looking at PLIXs being done every quarter, and we're now able to match that a bit better nationally. So we should begin to get some information coming through, but it's got a couple of months delay sitting through on before it comes through. We're also introducing service line reporting, which I think needs to feed into the productivity element, but this probably won't shift until next year's return. I think maybe possibly, so this is the 24-25, possibly by December, could be January. I don't exactly know the timing of when that will then come through, but that will be the next refresh. You will get to that metric. I think also when I had looked at it, it looked like there was a red metric on Q1, which on the Q2 finance performance, which obviously is green because we're posting a 66,000 surplus. So the only red one should be that national metric on the comparative total cost of services at 1.09.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'm going to suggest, Manisa.
One question about, not for now, I can't find it, but I know we were hoping to be in NOF1, and there was one metric which, sorry, unhelpfully I can't find, but it stated in order to be NOF1, you have to score 75, and we were scoring 70.9.
Yeah, so other than finance, which will push you straight to NOF3, I think the others are an aggregate. So in some we do really well, in others we're on the borderline. I think there's one, maybe two, where we're just below the average, but we still expect that when you take it all together, that we will be in NOF1. And part of why I thought it would be good to have a session with the board is to review everything and be absolutely crystal clear about our plans for ensuring that we get on top of every single one where it's possible, because some of these will run for a whole year and there's not a great deal you can do. So if you take the staff survey, for example, what the outcome of this survey that's on now will feature in our NOF, and we won't be able to change it until the next staff survey results. Yeah.
Okay, I think. Yeah.
You want to come back, Munisa?
Say it's the percentage of patients in crisis to receive face-to-face contact within 24 hours. So this is one of those, which despite what it says, it's not fatal to our submission, even though we're quite a bit low.
If you look at in June, we were at 50% and it's gone up to 70%, and we're definitely moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we break here for 10 minutes. Apart from anything else, to stretch backs and things. So if we meet again at 10 minutes to, and everyone can have some coffee and a leg stretch and whatever else. Thank you. I think we should. I think we just got Alison. Let's kick off now. So thank you, everybody. If we could start now, return to the part 1 meeting, and we've got the operational report. Lorraine, thank you very much for reporting on this. In your hands.
Thank you, Chair. So just a few things to highlight from the report that people will have read. The first is around neighbourhoods. So people will know that we have been confirmed as the host, sometimes called the integrator in Greenwich and Bexley, and the current work stream around that is to complete the maturity matrix. That will need to be submitted later this month. So there's several meetings that a number of people are involved in to ensure that we work with those systems to get that over the line. And Iffy has already reported that Sarah has been confirmed as leading some of that work for us, just to provide people with some reassurance about what happens to adult community physical health whilst she takes up that role. So she has 2 very able ADs in Rachel and Lisa, who will manage the day-to-day operations while she steps into that role. And the 3 priority areas for South East London around frailty, multiple long-term conditions and children. We have several clinicians and operational leads across our boroughs engaged in work to inform and progress those priorities. Moving on to bed recovery, people will have read that we were expecting to get to 0 out-of-area placements by the 1st of November. We do still have 3 people in out-of-area placements, but we haven't admitted anybody since the beginning of October. And those 3 people are about ready to move on. So we will have achieved that very soon, and admissions remain low. So that's been good news. In terms of some of the directorate updates, I just wanted to highlight 2 areas. The first, the really fantastic work that our frailty team have done in adult community physical health. You'll see from some of the figures in the report that that programme of work has achieved a 53% reduction in ED visits and a 33% drop in unplanned hospital admissions. They were recently visited by Daniel Oxleas, who's the Chief Exec of NHS Providers, and he was really impressed and felt that it was a really good example of how we will achieve the left shift from hospital to community. So that was very positive for those services. And then just to highlight in adult community mental health, the Adult ADHD Referral Management Centre opened this Monday on behalf of South East London. So that's a service that will now triage every adult ADHD referral across the patch. They're expecting to process around 10,000 referrals a year, so high volume service. And one of the things that it will give us, which we've really lacked, is some really granular data on the patterns of referral, which will hopefully enable better modelling of those services in the future. So that was all I was going to highlight, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lorraine. Questions and comments. I guess thinking about the neighbourhood teams to start off with, obviously, so we're now getting in, we have the key responsible person, we're getting in the structures in that one. Are we going to be, as part of that, be able to think about what we do in terms of co-production with patients or with service users or with citizens around what it will mean for them, and so that we can perhaps start telling the story of how this will be different for a user of the services? Thank you.
I mean, I think that is certainly a key component of the work, and actually some of us are visiting some services in Birmingham next week to see how they did that, and we know that they did quite a significant amount of co-production in designing their services. Part of the maturity matrix was to think about what the current priorities are, and I think that is certainly come up quite strongly as one of them, albeit I think behind the fact that there are still some relationships across the agencies that form part of those systems that need some work before we can then expect to go out giving kind of messages to the public. But it's definitely a priority.
Thank you, Damien.
You give us a lot of data on timely care waiting times. The report says that it's by exception. And so we've got a long list of directorates or types of treatment or condition for which in many cases our performance is well below target. A bit difficult for me as a non-clinician and just to look at all of that. But can you go through that and maybe just help us understand how big of an issue it is? I mean, if it's by exception, what about the rest of the activity? I mean, are we doing much better? And is that something that, Suzanne, you monitor the quality committee? Other sub-question is, we're below target, but have we given up? Can we do better? Can we do more? Or is it...
So that list are the services that are currently off track in terms of performance. So where we have improvement plans in place and a need to ensure that we're doing everything we can to meet that target. One of the challenges that IFE set in a recent exec was to think about being really clear whether we actually think we can get back on track with the current demand and capacity, resources, etc. And so there is quite a lot of work happening at the moment to really be able to be very clear with colleagues about whether or not this is a problem that we can improve on with transformation or quality improvement, value improvement, or whether this is a problem that because of high demand and the resources available, we might really not see much improvement over a significant period of time. So probably two examples that I can give you, because we've looked at them in the zero delays strategic group, is that in adult ADHD, for example, we know that the demand well outstrips any capacity, and that despite lots of innovation and really good practice, we will not see those weights improve over the next year without a significant change in direction of travel nationally or in resources. Whereas in other areas, so Bromley West Adapt, for example, there is currently some QI work going on supported by Vicky's team, where we think we will expect to get back on track before the end of the financial year. So I think perhaps what we can look to do in the future is, once that work is complete, add into this report those services where we think we're moving in the right direction and we'll be back on track, and those where perhaps we think that the issue is much more kind of systemic and unlikely to change in the near future.
I think I would welcome that. I think for me is where we are not on track, what is the ambition? What is the realistic ambition? How do we track against that ambition? And I appreciate that we do our best with limited resources and a huge amount of unmet demand in the community. But if we are where we are today, where could we be within 6 to 12 months, and how do we get there? I think interesting message to look at.
And if I could add to that, Damien, I think also in some of these it would be useful to know, what is the kinetic, what's the long-term performance? Because one of these, 293 with a target of 295, that sounds like it maybe has just dipped under in 1 month. One worries less about that than something that has been persistently off target for a while. So it would be good to have some sense of that. Suzanne.
If I could just respond to your question, Damien, we have a really thorough look at the performance every month in the Quality Committee. And I think there's probably an issue about how, as a Quality Committee, we summarise that discussion to come forward to the board. So the report that we get undergoes, I would say, probably permanent redesign. Each time we receive one of them, we say, can we have this information in a slightly different way or a better way, or have additional information? The last time that we received a report, I think we were really pleased that what that report told us was exactly where the negative exceptions were, but more importantly, exactly what was being done to address them. We have been through a process of asking to have those action plans presented and then updated, and key ones will come back to us on a 6-monthly basis. It used to be more frequent than that, but there was no point, because it takes a certain amount of time to tackle some of these key challenges. So I think I'd want to provide the board with the assurance that that report is clear, it's detailed, it contains all of the data that we have asked for. The one thing that we have not managed to get to yet, and this goes to your point about the exceptions, is that what we get are the negative exceptions. And one of our ambitions as a Quality Committee is to know where the positive exceptions are, which are those teams which are able to not just sustain the performance in terms of numbers of clients they see, but also the quality of the care that they're getting. And that's a piece of data work which remains interesting, shall we say. The only other thing I'd say about the issue of progress is that last time we received the new form report, which had a lot of work done on it to address the NOF, was that we asked whether or not that information could be presented in the form of an SPI chart so that we could see progression over the period. And that's a request which has been taken on board, but is apparently difficult to meet. So I think the key message here for board is that the performance data that we get is detailed, is helpful, enables us to track things. There may be some question for me about how that comes forward, that assurance to this board. We've already got quite a long quality committee report, and it's difficult to know at what level the board would really want to know what more you would want to know to provide you as a board with the assurance.
Iffy, and then I might say something before Martin comes in.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add that I did say earlier that I'd like us to perhaps at a strategic next year look at the north, existing and new ones, and you find that a number of these are in the north. So as a suggestion, we'll do that. And then I think it will be useful to then think about areas where we need to do additional work, which we can then present at the same meeting. And I hope that in part 2 of today's meeting, I can comment on some of the additional support we're giving to directorates to prioritize access, prioritize inequality, and certainly prioritize some of these areas where we aren't doing so well.
Martin?
Sorry, Chair, I thought you were wanting to come in first. So, Damien, you asked the question. From a non-clinical aspect. So I felt, as the only clinical non-executive on the board, I should have a response. And supporting everything Suzanne says, I've seen a lot of that iteration over the past few months in my short time, and that will continue. I'm getting a bit of a reputation on that committee for being the one who likes numbers, and I'll keep pushing for that because I think it's really important that we see that improvement, but we're talking about people's lives as well. And I think, therefore, it's really important that we start to see things through different lenses. So we meet targets, and as Azra really helpfully declared before the meeting start, when we were sharing some personal experiences, even if we're meeting a target, there are people affected by long waits and by delays and cancellations and all of those things. So we've got to be mindful of those, and we take assurance in the Quality Committee that the right processes are in place to make sure we look after people well on waiting lists, etc. There's areas where we can improve, as you mentioned, Lorraine, and we'll do that. You mentioned there's areas we can't improve. I would split that into 2. One where there are national targets which we're expected to hit and we just feel we can't, but we still got a national target to hit, and we need to think about how we do that. But then there are other areas where we are commissioned to do stuff and we haven't got enough resource from it. So I think it's important to distinguish between the 2. But finally, and this is a reflection from all of my visits that I've been doing over the past few months, is we've got to be clear about what our core role is. And many, many teams I've visited have said, well, of course we do this because no one else does it. We keep on doing stuff because the local authority haven't got the resources, or the GPs can't do this, or someone else in the system can't do it. And we're great. We take that on board and we absorb it. But that means we don't hit our targets, or we don't provide the services for the things we absolutely should be. And I think we need to think about those things in terms of patient care as much as in the numbers.
Jim?
Completely agree with you, Martin. But the other side of the coin is a lot of our staff are really committed to their patients. And so when we have that discussion with them, it's really tough for them to understand, then the question comes, who will do this? And so when we go to the prisons, they're saying, look, we think we're the last line of defence with some of these people before they go into the abyss. And sort of trying to have that conversation is a really tough. I agree 100%. I don't disagree. I'm just saying it's a tough conversation.
I think it's a celebration of the great work our staff do. We as a board have to help them.
Just the experience of the staff. I mean, it's one of the things I was going to talk about with the board visit report. So the mental health liaison teams get that a lot, where they get a lot of people who are not in need of our mental health services, but are in need of some service, and what that is like to be in the coal face as a work experience, telling that person, sorry, there's no one to help you, go away, and how you can continue to find your job rewarding, meaningful, purposeful when that is part of the role. And I think, you know, we not just have to think about the care for the patients, but also how we motivate our staff and make this a role where they, you know, tap their compassion and their purpose.
Thank you, Pat. What I was going to think about this is, you know, I think that clearly the Quality Committee really kicked the tires on this, and we don't want to do this again at board. What I think it's important perhaps for board members who are not on the Quality Committee to know is to think, what are the top 5 issues that are keeping the Exec and Quality Committee awake at night, if a committee can be awake at night. But you know, what are the ones here that are actually the ones that are either because they are the ones having the biggest impact on patients, which is the most important, or because they're having the biggest impact on how we are measured, and which is of secondary importance, but still of importance. And equal, as Suzanne sort of indicated, also, what are the top 5 things that we should be really proud of? And I wonder whether we could think about some way of highlighting that, because I'm sort of thinking away about sometime in the future the CQC will become a calling, and we all know this stuff, but actually it's having it at the top of our head. What are the things we're most worried about as an organisation? And I don't know how to do that, but I give that to you as a question. Yeah, Abby.
Mine is not about the performance report, but I didn't talk about the resident doctor industrial actions. I thought I'll do that before we go on. So you will be aware that the resident doctors have called industrial action from 7 a.m. on the 14th of November to 7 a.m. on the 19th of November. And as we have done with previous industrial actions, we will stand down some of our services, but make sure that we maintain all our essential services. And for us, that means all our on-call and 24-hour emergency services. So we have set up an incident group, and I'm Gold, and we've had our first meeting, and I'm pleased to say that we've been able to cover probably about 97% of our on-call rotas, both overnight and during the day. I will know tomorrow how many clinic appointments we may need to cancel. We haven't had to cancel because we only do podiatric surgery. We haven't had to cancel any because that usually is on Thursday, and the industrial action is going to run from Friday to Wednesday. The other thing we do is to keep track of patient harm, and we try to make sure that patients don't get their appointments cancelled twice. So if they've been cancelled before, we will ensure that they don't cancel again. What has been difficult for us is trying to assess what impact this has on waiting times, but we'll see what we can do. And so we've got our internal meetings, but there will also be South East London meetings and national meetings during the period of industrial action. So happy to take any questions on that.
Helpful summary, and I think that sounds to me as it's in hand and control, and I'm afraid we have experience in doing this, so thanks. Can I ask a question, Lorraine, going back to the positive news about the frailty team, the 53% reduction in emergency ED visits and 33 in unplanned hospitals? Really, very good news. And I know we've done internal comms around this one. 2 questions. One, the external comms to our acute partners, are they aware of this side of it? But also, how are we spreading that information to other trusts as to, what is it that we've done well here? What is it we could have done better? What are the lessons that we've learned in implementing this? How are we doing that sort of work so others can follow and learn from us and so on?
Certainly within our systems, it has been well talked about. So Rachel Matheson did a really good presentation at a recent GP neighbourhood event, and it has been through some borough comms. But I think, it's a fair point in terms of, and I think it's often something we reflect on, isn't it? How much are we really spreading the word more widely? How much are we really kind of waving the flag for the good work that we do? I think we probably, we've got much better, but there's probably more that we could do.
Sorry. I mean, externally, communications-wise, actually, we've spread this very, very widely. It's all on LinkedIn and website and everything. And, had a lot of following on LinkedIn. But those kind of communications is only one aspect. I think it's also kind of in the professional networks. But I know that's something that Sarah Birchall will want to do as our kind of lead on integration, is linking in with the other health hosts, both within our system, but also more widely. And there is also the national pilots that are happening on developing neighbourhoods, and that will also create a sort of national opportunity for sharing good practice. So I know Sarah will be wanting to kind of make the most of those networks.
I'm just that Daniel Elkos, when he visited, wrote up a paper that would have gone to all providers across England. As Sally has said, one of the frustrations is the degree to which we push our way into national conferences, events, and present stuff. And this, I think, is something we must do. Not just because it's great news, but also to be challenged to think about how we can do it better.
Abby.
We've also decided to go international as well. So we put them forward for a poster at the Institute for Health Innovation conference in Oslo in March, and that was accepted. So from the value improvement point of view, but also from the kind of working as an integrated team. So the team will be going with a representative from the quality team to present their work there.
Thank you. And I think it's also one of the ones that NEDs and people like myself can also help on. It's like a soundbite that we can remember and you slip into conversations as well. Not again about boasting, but about actually, as you say, challenging ourselves, but also sharing where we can share and learning where we can learn. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions for Lorraine? No, thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move on to the, whoops, the wrong piece of paper there. We're going to move on to the non-executive directors' reports. And as normal, I'll go around and again ask people to take the papers as read, but to perhaps bring out themes from their visits. And so I'll go around from my right. Damien, you did district nursing.
So I did 2 visits. I did 2 visits. I think there's only one report at this stage. That was at Goldie Lee, district nursing. Inspiring discussions, very inspiring to listen to the teams and what they do and how they do it. They're very proud of the service they deliver, and really it was a pleasure to listen to that. In terms of the issues around logistics, I think mostly the travel time, how they book their expenses and their mileage. A question as well on security on the Goldie Lee site. I mean, when you think about it, the site is quite dark at night. There's a lot of little corners and so on. So I think questions were raised on that. So I think we need to ensure that our people are safe on the site, especially at night. Not much else to say. I mean, I was really inspired by what I heard, basically, and I pretty admired the work done, and met with a really, inspired staff, I think is the word.
Thank you, Damien. Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Myself, Andrew and Neil went down to the Southwest to visit Channings Wood and Exeter prisons. This was our first visit, or mine and Neil's first visit since the consultation period, I think. And so the good news is there was a significant increase in morale. The care model had been developed, has been embedded and iterated on, and the regional management seems to be really working. So there's a good connection between the regional managers and the individual prisons. So that's all good news. In general, in Channings Wood, I think the main issue, as I discussed earlier on, was the change in population that they're seeing, and how the staff react to the change in the complexion of the population, with more people coming in from with the sexual offender background, and there was some concern over that and some training they're asking for. But in general, very, very positive relationships between the team and the governor. In Exeter, there was estate issues. The actual estate is not very good, unfortunately, but there's nothing we do about that. But again, really good news on improved recruitment, lower vacancies. That's improving staff morale as well. And there was a really positive sort of caring culture. So I think from our point of view, things are on the right track, and obviously financially as well, the whole Southwest is operating really well.
Thank you. And if I could just add a little bit to the Channings Wood one, I think there's also a bit which isn't really in the report and not right in the report, but there's actually also an opportunity there. They're talking about whether to build a hospice in that prison, or hospice type beds in that prison. So I think that there's very strong relationships with the governor and an ability to develop things there if we wanted to, which might be interesting. Anisa, you've got quite a lot here.
I've got two, and I touched on one of them. One of the issues. I'll take the reports as read. I try to ask in these visits, what people like about their roles, what motivates them, and some of the themes are usually strong teams, strong kind of collaborate culture, and good management, and that's I think a little bit within our control. But a lot of the other things that sort of come back, I really reflected after the visit to the mental health liaison team, are things that are probably really vulnerable to our drive towards productivity and efficiency. So we talked about, so at one of the teams talked about how when they are confronted with people who are not within their patient, who are not going to be their patients, they remember that there are still people, all the time and energy they spend working with volunteer organizations to make sure that they can facilitate them finding somewhere else. The older age mental health liaison team has a smaller caseload than the working age one. And they talked a lot about how much they appreciated having the time to really get to know the patients, all that sort of reflection and kind of all that extra that they could do because they had a smaller caseload. And these are kind of some of the hard decisions that I think we have no choice to make. But it is, I guess, humbling or concerning when you ask that question, and frequently feels like the answer that comes back are the items that are most under pressure. On the visit to Tarn and Shepherdley, both good visits. Again, I think the thing that stood out for me, it was very humbling at one point when we were at the Tarn and realized that the three people in the room with us were all people who'd been basically violently attacked over the last 6 months. And I think it's, whether it's that or it's abuse or aggression, these are just moments where you feel very powerless. When we visited the mental health liaison team, one of the person commented, what's the purpose of this visit? We tell you our problems and you fix them. Unfortunately, that's not true most of the time. And I think that, really when you're talking about the aggression, the abuse, and you hear it, and then that's it. It really, it makes you feel very powerless, and I would say embarrassed. I felt sort of embarrassed, and I think this was not brought up as a complaint. We have remarkable people who are willing to continue, who show incredible compassion. But I think for us as leadership, or for me, I find it really difficult hearing that about those experiences and knowing that is the end. after that conversation. And I do appreciate that there's a lot of work we can do, but ultimately this problem is not going away, right? So it's really difficult, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't hear about it, but it is a very frustrating and demotivating experience.
So I'm hearing I think that's a really important observation, because we do need to hear this, but you're right, it's sometimes you feel powerless. And I wonder whether we just as a group need to reflect a bit on how we frame those conversations and how we react and support each other in those conversations afterwards. And I don't quite know the right format. This isn't the right format in a formal meeting, but we maybe need to think about that a little bit. I think so. Thank you for bringing that one up. And I think we need to take that away as a bit of an action to think about that. Thank you. I'm going to plough on unless anybody stands up and says something. But Jane, you've got one because you did it.
Yeah, I did offer to reschedule, but they'd already gone there en route, and quite rightly, you weren't well enough to attend. So thank you for not attending when you weren't well. It was really good to see the Woodlands teams, and I think on the day that I visited, very similar to the experience Moniz has just described, there was significant environmental damage to both wards that had been caused in the 2 days before. And it was just very visible evidence of the acuity and how patients were being looked after and how staff were being looked after and how they were looking after each other and how the police were involved as well. So I think this is what people are living and experiencing, as we know, on a regular basis. And we have increased the number of listening events that the violence and abuse leads in each directorate are putting on. And people are really valuing the opportunities to express themselves and receive that support, particularly in acute and crisis. That's happening on a monthly basis in all of the units now through the P&A model, which is helpful. But yeah, it was a really strong reminder of how hard it is on some of our wards.
Thank you, Jane. Suzanne?
So I visited the FIND team. I'm still not exactly sure what FIND stands for. It's something to do with forensics and neurodevelopmental. But the gist of it is that they provide a support service for people who are discharged from the criminal justice system, but who have neurodevelopmental needs and disorders and require support. It was actually a very encouraging visit. The team has been reorganised recently, and I've mentioned that in the report. But I think the very positive thing was that although they had found the change process difficult, they were settling into feeling that as a team they were working together well and that they were working well with their service users. The things that I wanted to highlight really, which are kind of themes from which people have picked up on today, that they get immense pleasure in their work from really small steps and small indicators of progress from the clients that they work with, so that in terms of their pride in their work, what might look like a trivial outcome, which has been achieved at great effort, is something that gives them an enormous amount of pleasure. And I mentioned a couple of those in the report. I think that when I was struck when I did another visit recently and asked the question about what are your proudest achievements in your clinical work recently, that they're not expecting to be asked that. And it takes them a while to think, what have I actually achieved in my working life? And in the most recent visit I did, which was also to forensics, the ward manager mentioned at the end of it, she said, we never talk about the things that we've achieved. We're always on to the next problem. And I think one of the functions of a board visit can be to provide that opportunity and to congratulate people on the small steps which they've achieved with their clients. The other thing that was quite striking was that this was a team that was very strict about sticking to their referral criteria. And that meant that they had very clear boundaries. They had control over their caseload, but they also recognised it meant that there was a certain group of clients who were slipping through the gaps. And the other thing to mention, I think, is about the innovation and research and the extent to which they felt we highlighted it. And I should give a shout out to the research team here, because one of the people in the FIND team is research active, but he said that the quality of research support that they get now is immeasurably different from what it was in the past. And one very long shout out, I don't know how many of you have been to the Woodland camp at Memorial, but the staff had an away day there, and they said it was the best away day they'd ever had in the little Woodland camp. So I think this is a facility we should be making staff aware of.
And we should perhaps consider, but only in the summer. But we should. Sorry, Abby, I slipped over because, of course, Sophie's not with us. So you did with her the Greenwich Community Mental Health team.
Yes, on the 10th of October, we went to the Greenwich Older People's Community Mental Health team, which for me is like coming home, because I know that service very, very well. Very, very cohesive team. They did talk about the difficulties they've had, because they've had consultant vacancies and manager vacancies, and all those have been filled now. So they've got 2 substantive consultants they've appointed to their Band-Aid manager, but they seem to take everything in their stride and said they used the opportunity of the vacancies and sickness to discover new ways of working and change their processes and do more innovation. I think what they were concerned about is what they deemed as inappropriate referrals from GPs. And it's very difficult when with older adults, and it points to what Martin was saying about what is our core role, what do we do. So an older person who is lonely can repeatedly present with anxiety and depression, but the root of the problem is loneliness, and it's how you sort of support them to address that. So that was one of their concerns. And as you were saying, that doesn't mean they will discharge. They will then take the patient on and do a period of work with them rather than signpost them, because they just feel they need to do something with the patient. The only other thing they were concerned about is digital exclusion for older adults, and they were looking into ways in which people could be included. And I think it was in reference to the 10-year plan around moving from analog to digital and what that meant for some people and how you would mitigate against that. But they were very positive about the support they received. They knew about the Guardian service. They knew about the staff survey. They had their flu jabs. Everything I could bring in, I did at that time. So yeah, it was all good.
Thank you. And Martin, you're not on, I've been.
Oh, well, I don't have a report, but that's due to my incompetence rather than anything else. I sent it to the wrong email address. But I need to say it because I did it on behalf of Suzanne, and she'll think I've been lazy and haven't done my job. So I went to visit the forensic community team at the Bracton Centre on the 29th of September. And I've done a number of other visits. I just wanted to mention 3 things, if that's all right. So one is to echo the point made about change programme. They echoed how difficult that change programme was, but what the real benefits were now they were living it. And I think, we've got some really tough decisions to go through where we're going to have to make unpopular decisions as a senior leadership in this organisation of improvement through change programs. So I think that's worth remembering as we go through difficult times. Second thing to say. And it goes back to the theme we were talking about, productivity and what should we do and all those things. I completely agree, Manisa and Jim, with you. Our job as senior leaders is to allow people to do their job and us to take the difficult decisions about what we do and what we don't do. One of the things we do very badly is count indirect care. So we look at productivity and we go, you've only seen 3 patients this week, where they might have sat for 3 days on a safeguarding board talking about that patient, but that's not counted because the patient isn't physically in front of them. And we need to start to think about direct care that does not have the patient in front of us, because we do a lot of that in this organisation. And the final thing, you mentioned research. I attended the launch of, I'll get this right, the South London Commercial Research Delivery Centre on the 14th of October, and that was brilliant. The enthusiasm to innovate and to do research was palpable, to the point where I asked a question about how do you get more nurses involved, and they said, come and talk to us, we'll get you involved. I went, no, that's not my question. I'm quite keen to do it, but it's more how do we get more nurses and more AHPs involved, and we are, and this was a great.
So I happened to meet the next day the GSTT people who were involved in it in a different meeting, face to face, and they bounced up to me. They were at a King's House Partners meeting. It was just fantastic being involved in Oxleas. They were so excited about it. My report is, I've got several reports outstanding that haven't yet come through, but I'm sure that they'll come through soon. But with Lorraine and with Abby, I visited the learning disability team for Bromley and Bexley. Not a lot to say about that because it's a really well-functioning unit, but it's an example of those units that we've heard several of before. And I mentioned at the beginning that actually they're being innovative, they're doing research, they're enthusiastic. I mean, it was one of those meetings where they kept saying, "Do you want to see some more people?" And another 5 people would bounce up in front of us, and there was people who had retired and returned to work. And their innovation wasn't just around service, but it was also around how they recruited people, how they brought people on. It was a real pleasure. And again, it's around thinking about what is it that makes that team and others, but plenty of others, but to varying extents, that team able to feel free to innovate, feel free to do research. Their only question was, how can we get this research out there more, which was an easy one for Abby to help them with. So it was a great visit, and it's around thinking through, and I think it's around very clear purpose. They had a very clear purpose and a very clear commitment to that purpose, and that drove their innovation, their thinking. Good. Any other questions or comments on this area? No, in that case, we'll go into the committee reports. Suzanne, the Quality Committee, please.
I often find by the time we get to the Quality Committee report that we've talked about a lot of this in other areas of the meeting. So I just wanted to draw people's attention to a few key points. One is that we do include some material on the National Outcomes Framework and the NOF and our thinking about it on page 106 of the bundle. I think that one of the things I just wanted to draw to people's attention was that we're very conscious that when you start ensuring that you're reaching targets and you're looking at your data, it can appear that the really important thing is reaching the numbers rather than whether or not people are getting the service they ought to be getting. And we did have a discussion on that one about the measurement of the 24, being seen within 24 hours on the of patients in crisis. And the point that was made to the committee is that some of the recording of this is what causes the problem in establishing that we are reaching the goal that the NOF is asking us to reach. And we had quite a fairly long discussion seeking assurance that this isn't just about changing the numbers and shifting people from one bit of a number to another bit of a number. And the committee, I would say, gained assurance that what we're doing here is looking seriously at whether or not people are getting the intervention that they need in the time that they need, not that we're just changing the way in which it gets recorded. So I think that it's something that we're very conscious of in terms of the weight that the outcomes framework may carry in our seeking assurance. The other point that I'd wanted to draw attention to, because it in some ways echoes the discussion we started off with about domestic abuse, is that we had a lunch and learn session at the end of the committee meeting, and we looked at an article which had come out of work that had been done in Canada, in Ontario, on integration. And the most striking thing about that was its reference to research indicating that what patients think integration should be about and what they want to get from it is not the same as what organisations think that integration is about. So we look at it largely as being about how we organise our structures and integrate the services. Patients are looking at it from the perspective of what am I experiencing differently. And I think there's an important message in there about understanding what we're as a trust aiming to achieve, particularly in the neighbourhood working. It's ensuring that we are both organising and measuring what the difference that we're making through that reorganisation, I think, is critically important. But very open to any questions that you have about this report.
Very helpful, interesting observation. Questions? No, in that case, thank you very much indeed to Suzanne and the team working on that important work. Business and Infrastructure Committee. Jim.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. We covered 2 months in the report today. I'll assume the report as read and just highlight the areas. I think the key thing to say at month 6, the trust's on track financially, although we've had to use non-recurrent balance sheet flexibility. It's a very technical term, to achieve that. So what that means basically is that in terms of our SIPS target, where we've identified a certain level of SIPS target, which is now combined with living within our means, that is not enough. And I think now IFE has led a new programme, which from my latest information is more like on track as to what we need to do within terms of SIPS. So there is some assurance there. In terms of the SEL, month 6, again, broadly on track, which is really interesting from my point of view, considering last year and what happened last year with the SEL. But again, 2 things to point out with that. One is for other institutions, their SIPS targets tend to be backloaded. So in the coming months, let's see what happens with the SEL and those SIPS targets. And one thing to reference also is in terms of SIPS, Oxleas is somewhat an outlier. A lot of other institutions are looking at or reporting recurrent SIPS in their numbers, and we're not. So and we discussed that at length, and I think where we are internally with Oxleas is we have now a firmer grip on SIPS this year and next year with living on the means, and let's see whether some of those things that have been reported at SEL actually come to fruition by the end of the year. So let's see what happens. I think that was the main point I'd like to bring out. The second point really that sort of concerns me a little bit is the PFI project. We have a very close and solid grip on that with Steve, but again, it is a material risk to our finances this year. And what we're doing now with the single tender waiver that we're discussing in part 2 is looking to get ahead of the game and actually try to understand what our liability is going to be next year, if we can, and work to make sure that we have sufficient information so we can make an informed decision about the P5 project. And again, that's going through quite closely under BIC, but also there are some external meetings I'm involved with Steve and his team to actually make sure that we've got some grip on what's going on. So I'm fairly confident that that's fine. And then lastly, on a positive note, really interesting and really happy that Oxleas, within this financial sort of landscape they're in, we're still doing new and great stuff, which is the CYP Neurodiversity Hub. It's really excellent. We're doing this sort of work. We're pushing things forward within this landscape in which things are constrained.
Thank you. And I attended the part of the BIC which was dealing with the PFI, and I think that while you have concerns, my sense is that you feel we're now in a place where we're as best placed as we can to be ready for it, and we're also talking to partners who are in similar positions, as I understand it. Thank you. Any other questions for Jim? No, in that case, Nina, can I ask you to take us through the People's Committee, please?
Could I just... Sorry, I don't think you've spotted my hand.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see your hand. Please go ahead. I do apologise.
So it's just to say that within the report, and this was accurate at the time that we were having the Business and Infrastructure Committee, that we were expecting to do our final return of the medium-term financial plan in December. That deadline has now shifted because nationally they have moved the deadline. So we will be putting in a draft summary plan in December. There will be another iteration in January, and there will be a final sign-off of that plan in March, and we'll be discussing that in a bit more detail in part 2, but just for the public meeting, those timelines have adjusted.
Thank you for that clarification. That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, Nina, could you take us into the People's Committee, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Andrew. So we started the meeting, and what we want to alert the board to is we started the meeting with a discussion around the visible rise in racism and social division within some of our local communities. We touched on, for example, the increasing presence of flags in some of our local neighbourhoods and the impact that that has on staff and how that is linked to ongoing anti-immigration protests. We're all aware that the Trust has held a number of listening events for staff, and that staff have expressed feelings of fear for their loved ones and concerns about whether they are welcome to continue to stay in the UK and continue to work in the UK. I believe that programme of listening events continues, does it, Rachel?
They're now happening locally in teams, yes, rather than centrally. Yeah.
Thank you. On the assurance side, we will start with what you see in the board pack, which is the gender and race pay gap reports, which we reviewed. Future reporting is also going to include disability pay gaps. In respect of the 2025 reported pay gaps, so from a gender perspective, there is a slight increase, and that is attributable to factors such as more women in part-time working patterns and lower female representation in senior roles. In respect of the 2025 race pay gap, our results showed that BME staff are on average paid slightly more than white colleagues, which is attributable to an increased BME representation in our senior roles, including our medical roles. So we noted that there has been progress, but there continues to be a need for targeted initiatives to address both gender and race pay gaps, and those will continue to be impacted by the composition of the workforce and by working patterns that we've touched on. We also had quite a long discussion around the impact of Agenda for Pay and the Clinical Excellence Awards, which are legacy issues that we are continuing to see in some of the numbers. In terms of other areas that we want to assure the board on, we had an update that we very much welcomed on improvements that have been made across the trust, particularly in forensics and offender healthcare in rostering, and colleagues will know that that's been a piece of work that's been underway for some time. We heard about the way in which the best place to work strategy is being embedded with across the organisation through squad goals also. In terms of advisory, I'll start with health and safety update. We welcomed Steve to the role as he takes over from Rachel T. Evans, and we also congratulated Bonnie on her recent appointment as head of health and safety. We did note that, and obviously the discussion that we had was very much in the context that both of them are new to their respective roles. So we are giving them some space to work through some of the issues that they have inherited. In respect of the most recent health and safety update report, we noted some low scores in areas such as ligature management, kitchen sharps, and EPRR. EPRR stands for Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response. We're still working through, I think the team is still working through the extent to which those scores are attributable to, colleagues will be aware that we established midway through the audit year that we needed to introduce a different approach to the audit. So there is a lack of reliance that can be placed on a number of the scores. So the team are working through the extent to which those are genuinely low scores and need to be taken forward. We will have an update at the meeting of the People Committee next week. We also noted that we're not where we want to be on people safe, notwithstanding a recent improvement in the percentage of usage. We welcome the fact that we're looking to move to an app-based solution so that colleagues don't have to carry around yet another physical device with them, but usage is at 77%. And in the context of what we started the meeting discussion in terms of the current political unrest and the concerns that that is creating amongst our staff, an increased risk and anxiety of personal safety, we really do need to see an uptick there. And there's a number of areas that are being taken forward, including the app-based solution. We also heard an update on sexual safety and specialist national training that's being rolled out. We had a deep dive in before the September People Committee in August, and we then discussed it at the committee itself on the trends in sickness absence, particularly at the level of more senior staff. And there was an acknowledgement that we need to focus on two strands of work. One is from an operational perspective to make sure that we can really rely on the data that is being presented and that we're using that in the most effective way. The other is ensuring that there is as much support as we can provide to colleagues who are experiencing anxiety, stress and depression, MSK issues. It's always a really full meeting because of the extent of initiatives that are underway from the people team. So we heard ongoing progress with the kindness and compassion sessions, the fantastic result in terms of extending funding for level 7 apprenticeships, and securing funding also from NHS charity for a Wellbeing on Wheels bus. There is nothing more that I want to update on, but happy to take questions.
Thank you. And I think it's probably worth noting as we go past actually the fact that the race pay gap being -0 is a remarkable achievement. That doesn't mean that there aren't areas that we still don't need to work on and targeted. So I absolutely buy that, but it's actually there. Probably not many trusts that are in that position, I would guess. Damien.
Nina and Rachel, if I understand it correctly, our compliance with the use of the People Safe device is fairly low. Did I hear that 25 to 30% of staff do not use it?
No, Damien, you
Good,
heard.
Steve.
I'm happy to come in with a little bit of history. So it fluctuates. It is currently sitting, or the most recent scores that we had in September were 77. It has gone up to the mid to high 80s, but it tends to fluctuate. So Steve can talk us through the kind of detail, but I wouldn't want you to think it's that's a consistent picture.
Okay, I guess I'm looking at it from a risk point of view. If there's an incident with an employee who doesn't have the device,
yeah,
is that a failure on our side because we haven't pushed enough for employees to use that device at all times? I just don't really know how to think through the that compliance level.
Yeah, just to say that the has gone up. It has gone up, and it's report. The service heads.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I can't hear what Steve is saying. I'm really sorry.
Can you hear me now, Nina?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying that the figures have gone up in the next report, and we looked at the devices that we thought that we couldn't track as being used, and a lot of those have now been taken out of service because they're not actually assigned to people. And the third thing was I wrote to all the service heads to actually, with names of their staff that we thought had devices that hadn't been used recently, to ask them to talk to their teams. So it's a kind of three-pronged attack. And for the future, we're looking at a phone-based system because it's actually people have their phones with them rather than have devices that might not work or be lost or whatever. So it's reflected in the next report, but it's definitely improved a bit, quite a bit actually, and there's still a bit more work to go. But yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think there's some themes that we picked up as well about staff feeling unsafe due to intimidation. We need to think about as well going forward. Okay, thank you very much, Nina. Damien, can you take us to audit and risk?
Yes, two points to highlight. The first one is a good outcome of an internal audit report or internal audit project, in fact, on waiting lists. One of my personal interests is to ensure that waiting lists are not only correct, but that they are built in a fair way, and that patients can trust basically the way waiting lists are built. We've got a amber green conclusion for that report, which is very good, with some actionable recommendations. So I think the committee was assured that we've got a robust process to build and maintain waiting lists. The second point is on the statutory audit process. We had a good discussion on the process that applied to last year's reports, but also a forward-looking discussion for next year's process to ensure that the trust isn't caught with surprises as we finish the statutory audit process in June. So I think that's been some good teamwork there to effectively ensure a successful outcome of that work next year.
Thank you. And again, some of us were able to visit that meeting around it. Any other questions for Damien? No, thank you very much. In that case, I will make a quick report. The report on the South London Partnerships Provider Collaborative. The report is in front of you. I think the one that's probably worth bringing people's attention is the NHS 111 option 2 and the initial evaluation of that one. And I think the thing that I'd perhaps like to bring out that doesn't necessarily come out into that one is actually the fact there is an awful lot of rich data that came out of that. We were shown data around exactly where the telephone calls were coming from for 111/2, and it's not clear to I don't think it was clear to us actually how that data was actually necessarily being used and triangulated with other data to have needs. And so I think that's a bit of work that we all recognised that needed to be done. But as a service, I think that the evaluation shows that it's moving really in the right direction. It's getting the numbers in there. And then there was some work on non-notifiable incidents, but I think that can be taken as read. And as I discussed earlier, the chairing of this committee is going to move to the chairs of the 3 trusts in rotation. So any comments or questions for me? Martin, you were there as well, I think.
Yeah, so echo the things you said. I think the nature of the meeting is one of wanting to really explore better opportunities where we can improve services across South London, which wasn't palpable the first meeting I went to, and is now certainly the driver of conversation. So it's more strategic and less operational.
Thank you. And then the next report is on the Council of Governors update, incorporating as well a report on the annual members meeting. We ran the annual members meeting actually in this room after the last board development day, and I think it was very positive. It included a tour of the Queen Mary's site, so thank you to Estates for organising that one, and very clear presentations by Azra on finances, who actually fantastic at making it very, very clear and iffy on the production. We then have, in terms of the governors, there have been some very strong events which I wasn't able to attend. The one that they really found very helpful was the Understanding Dementia event. But we've had 2 new governors who have undertaken a governor's induction session. One is a staff governor, and one is the rest of UK governor, i.e. not a local governor, but the governor that covers the rest of England. So they've undergone their induction, and they will be starting, assuming the paperwork that they fulfil the paperwork, they'll be starting in December. And then the other thing I think we have to note at the past is Joe Mant, who's been looking after the governors for a long time, is retiring in December, and I think that is causing a lot of pain in the governor community as they understand how they move forward without her support and input, which has been absolutely invaluable. But I think that's okay. Thank you, everyone. In that case, now in 2 items to go. I'm actually going to just quickly cover the forward agenda, I think. I mean, the forward agenda we'd normally note, but just to say that one of the things that that Sally and I have talked with, and Sally and Rachel and I actually need to have some more conversations around, is around how we develop ourselves as a board team. So I would welcome anyone's thoughts about that one. We had actually combined with SLAM and South West London and St George's to put in an application to NHS England for a joint development session where all 3 boards would undergo a joint development session. That has not. The application went in and the effort was put into making the application, and NHS England have now paused that process. And so it's not that we were rejected, it's just that the process is paused. And we were rather relying on that as going to be our model going forward. And since that's been paused, I think we will be thinking through that. So I think any comments that anybody has on that, I think any one of us would be happy to take that. Okay, if I could go back to review and just ask about this meeting today. Do we feel that we have helped improve the service that we give to the people of our boroughs and of the people we serve in the prisons and so on? Have we made an impact in this meeting? Will we have made a difference? How could we have made a bigger difference? Any thoughts or comments on that?
I had a boss who said he was comfortable with silence, and I thought I'm not comfortable with silence. So a reflection on the first item from the domestic violence team, and how much it's difficult for us as a board to know what impact we have, because it doesn't feel like we do. We talk about stuff, we approve papers, and yet we heard last time we came, you listened to us, you posed some questions, it really changed things. And I think that's important for us to remember. And one of the, therefore, proxy measures of whether we're successful is, are we focusing on the people we serve? And as a board, that's patients and staff. And every item, that's been the focus of what we've done. So my reflection would be, we don't know if we make a difference, but we're focusing on the right things.
Sally.
I was just reflecting that it's come up a couple of bits today where we have maybe looked at things in board subcommittees and feel assured, but then it's kind of how assured do we feel as a wider board? And obviously, unless we're going to have board meetings that take a whole week, we have to delegate a certain amount to board subcommittees. One idea off the top of my head might be that we do a little bit more of shadowing or going into board subcommittees every so often from other committees, just to feel, and understand what's being talked about there. And if people thought that was a good idea, we could set that up. Or any other ideas, be very welcome to think through. Thanks.
Two things on Sally's point. I would welcome, I think, for the public, it would be useful to have a couple of slides at least on our recent financial performance in the Part 1 pack. The information on finance is part of the big report in the pack, but I think there's merit in having a backward look at our financial performance in the Part 1 pack, so that all board members can see it. We can ask questions on the past performance, and then we'll all agree that the sort of forward-looking measures we're taking living within our means and so on are better addressed in Part 2. But I think it's important to see that. On Martin's point, I mean, a good board is already a board that works as opposed to being dysfunctional. And I think it adds a lot of value already to have a fully functioning board that asks the right questions. And I think we achieved that this morning. I think we had some good debates, good discussions on racism, anti-Semitism, waiting lists, how to do more on waiting lists, cybersecurity and other topics, security for staff. And I think we've addressed a lot of the relevant questions. So,
thank you, Monita.
Yeah, I have a provocation for the agenda. So as long as I've been on the board, we've begun every meeting with a service user and carer involvement session. And I don't know whether we've always done this or whether this started as a way to elevate the agenda. And I really enjoyed these sessions. I think they ground us and they give that sort of patient insight. But I also think they have a value in, I don't know, for want of a better word, it's an exercise of soft power, right? It's a way of saying, we believe in this, we back this as a board, and we're going to have you come and present, and we're going to send that message. And I wonder if if there are other items that we want to give the same backing or the same elevation. So we talked a little bit about research and development. I was reflecting on the last board visit. The teams were very proud to talk about their QI projects that they had initiated and taken to fruition. I used to hear about those in the quality committee. We don't hear about them anymore. And some of these things, these mindsets are the ones that we want to encourage. So in the same way that we've sort of given our backing behind saying we believe and involve, do we want to do that for other items? And maybe we could do that on a rotational basis with involve if we feel like we're satisfied with it's embedded, or we could do it in addition to. But one, I think, to throw out there, what are there other things that we want to add to the agenda in that matter to show the organisation that we back this?
Thank you, and I think that's a really good provocation. Part of the bigger scenery we also got to remember is that we only started the last one, inviting to our Board Development Day staff groups as well. So in a way, there's one group. It's not answering your whole question, but again, just so that we get the full picture, we're doing. We had the veterans at the last Development Day, and we're planning to continue that in various ways. And the shadow exec are coming in December, so that's good. So yeah, but I think your points are well taken. Do we want to have the research group, the QI group, the whatever group, presenting maybe every third or something? I'm sort of getting a few nods around the table, so we might think about broadening that. That's a good one. Suzanne?
I just wanted to think a bit about the reporting of committee meetings to the board. So when we adopted the current, however many, 4 A's, I think, we felt it worked well. But I think one of the interesting things that you suggested, Chair, around what you want to know from the Quality Committee isn't necessarily encompassed in the way in which that cover sheet or front sheet is being used. And I wonder whether it would be of value to use the alert section slightly differently, to say these are the kind of top things which the committee spent its time exploring, and to also there in that section use it to celebrate some of the really good things that we've heard about, like, for example, the presentation we've had from on research in the past. So
I think that would be good, because I'm sort of aware that something like that would be good, because I'm sort of aware as well that we, at some stage there will be a CQC visit in the next 5 years. And when that happens, it would be very good. Again, a lot of us know this stuff implicitly, but to be explicitly be able to turn around and be able to have that pitch of actually these are the 5 things that we really are, that they're really worried about. These are the 5 things that they're really proud of. I take 5 as a random number, not as a real number. That would be helpful. Good. No, thank you. I mean, my reflections, I thought the meeting we had strong discussions, really helpful discussion at this meeting. I get the impression, but people can disagree, that people are able to don't feel inhibited about saying things in meetings. But if they do, we need to uncover that one. So that was a wrong way of phrasing that question. It doesn't give you a chance to say otherwise. But hopefully people feel the ability to talk openly in these meetings. And thank you, everybody. Time is now 1:10. We've got quite a large part 2. I'm going to suggest we break for half an hour for lunch, and we start again at 22, if that's okay with everybody, because we've got quite a large part 2. What we will do now is thank you everybody who's been listening in, and I hope you find this instructive. We'll stop the recording in just a moment when I finish talking, but we'll break now, and I'll thank members for part 1, and then for people who are joining part 2 as members, we're going to call you in through the miracle that is Teams when the time comes. Thank you.